Sometimes the truths that change everything don't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. They show up quietly in the pages of an old journal you were never meant to find, while the people you love are still smiling across the dinner table. I learned that the hard way one weekend at the family lakeside vacation house. My name is Avery Thompson. I am 28 years old and I teach high school history in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I've always tried to be honest, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. That honesty, I later realized, had become something my family quietly resented. If you've ever felt your voice being gently but steadily pushed to the side in your own family, I hope sharing what happened helps you feel a little less alone. Write, relate if this sounds familiar. The invitation came on a Thursday night. My father called and said the whole family was already heading to the lakeside vacation house in Wisconsin for the weekend. It was a surprise gathering, he told me, and he really wanted me there. My older brother Brandon and his wife were already on the road. My mother Karen sounded excited on the phone. I packed a bag, left Albuquerque early Friday morning, and drove the long stretch north, telling myself this could be a chance to reconnect. When I pulled up to the familiar wooden house by the water late that afternoon, my father Michael met me at the door with a hug that lasted a second too long. My older brother Brandon stood behind him, hands in his pockets, wearing the easy grin he always had when he knew he was the favored one in the room. Avery, you made it, my father said. Brandon was just telling us about the big project he closed at work, the way he handled the whole team, real leadership. You should hear the story. I smiled and set my bag down. The praise for my older brother rolled out so naturally it almost sounded like affection. What it really was, I would soon understand, was the opening move in something they had planned long before I arrived. I went upstairs to the guest room to unpack and look for extra blankets. In the back of the linen closet behind a stack of old quilts, I found a worn leather journal. It had belonged to my grandmother. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it, expecting summer memories and recipes. Instead, near the back, I found pages written in her careful handwriting from several years earlier. She had overheard conversations between my father and my older brother. They had made a quiet agreement to keep me from having real say in family matters. My honesty, they decided, was too disruptive. The plan was to use gatherings like this one to praise my older brother's choices while gently publicly diminishing mine, so I would eventually stop speaking up and simply fall in line. Tucked between the pages was an old photograph of all of us at the lake years ago. On the back in my grandmother's hand was a short note. They believe pushing her down is kindness. I fear it will only make her leave. I read the words twice. My hands felt cold. Every time my father had changed the subject when I talked about my life in Albuquerque, every time my older brother had laughed and said I was too serious about things that mattered to me, every time the conversation turned to what the family should do, and my opinion was smiled past, it hadn't been accidental. It had been a strategy. I closed the journal, placed it back exactly where I found it, and went downstairs. Dinner was already on the table. My mother Karen was setting out plates. My cousin Tyler Brooks had arrived with his easy laugh, and our longtime family friend Lisa Rivera was slicing pie. The neighbor from the next cabin, Eleanor Vance, waved from her porch across the narrow stretch of grass. At the table, my father started the conversation the way he always did now. Brandon's been caring so much for this family, he said, passing the potatoes. The way he steps up, puts everyone else first. That's what real commitment looks like. My older brother nodded modestly the way he had learned to do. Then my father looked at me. Avery's got her teaching job down in Albuquerque. That's good for her, I suppose. But it means she's not always around when family decisions need to be made. We understand. The words were soft. The dismissal underneath them was not. I felt the familiar sting and for a moment stayed quiet. I'd promised myself I would try to keep the peace this weekend, but the journal entry was still burning in my mind. Later that evening, while everyone else was on the porch watching the sunset over the water, I walked down to the edge of the lake to breathe. Eleanor Vance was sitting on her own small dock next door. She called over gently. Avery, I don't mean to intrude, she said, but I heard your father and brother talking on the porch last night when they thought everyone was asleep. They were going over how they were going to handle things this weekend, Make sure you didn't take over any conversations about the house or family plans. They said they'd let everyone see how difficult you can be if you speak up too much. I've watched this family for a long time. It didn't feel right to stay silent about it. Her words landed like confirmation I hadn't wanted. The pact in the journal wasn't just old writing, it was still alive. I thanked her, my voice smaller than I meant it to be, and walked back toward the house. Inside, the laughter continued. My older brother was telling a story about work. My father was nodding along, pride clear in his face. My mother smiled at both of them. No one looked at me. I went to bed that night with the lake sounds outside the window and the weight of two discoveries pressing on my chest, the journal and the neighbor's quiet warning. I didn't know yet how the rest of the weekend would unfold, but I already understood that the easy family get togethers I had once taken for granted were never coming back in the same way. The next morning, the lake was still and bright, but the house already felt different to me. I came downstairs to the smell of coffee and bacon and the sound of my father and my older brother talking at the kitchen table like they owned every decision that would ever be made here. My mother, Karen, was flipping pancakes at the stove. She gave me a small, tired smile when I walked in. My cousin Tyler Brooks was already there, scrolling on his phone, and Lisa Rivera was setting out plates. Outside, Eleanor Vance was watering the flowers along the property line, glancing toward our porch every so often. "Morning, Avery," my father said without looking up from his mug. "Brandon and I were just going over the numbers on the lake house. Maintenance is getting expensive. We think it might be time to talk seriously about selling it or turning it into something that actually pays for itself." My older brother nodded, the same easy confidence he always wore when the two of them were aligned. "It makes sense. I've been the one driving up here every few months to check on things. Avery's got her life in Albuquerque now. She probably doesn't have the bandwidth for this kind of responsibility." The words were said lightly, like he was protecting me from a burden I couldn't handle. I felt the old familiar heat rise in my chest, the same heat that had always made me speak when I should have stayed quiet. "I actually do have thoughts about it," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were tight around my coffee mug. "This place has been in the family for 3 generations. If we're going to make a big decision, everyone who cares about it should have a real say, not just the people who live closest." My father set his mug down slowly. He looked at me the way he sometimes looked at a student who had interrupted a lecture. "Avery, honey, we all know you care, but caring from a distance isn't the same as carrying the weight. Brandon's the one who's been here. He's the one who drops everything when something needs fixing. You've built a whole life in New Mexico. That's wonderful for you, but it means you're not in the day-to-day anymore." My older brother leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, still smiling, like this was all very reasonable. "Dad's right. You're great at what you do down there, teaching, making a difference. But this is family business. Sometimes it's better to let the people who are actually around handle it." I could feel every pair of eyes in the room. Lisa Rivera had stopped moving. Tyler had put his phone down. My mother kept her back to us, flipping pancakes that were already done. I took a slow breath. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to make a scene, but I also wasn't going to pretend the dismissal didn't hurt. "I'm not asking to run the place," I said quietly. "I'm asking not to be treated like my opinion doesn't count just because I chose a different city. That's all." My father sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. "See, this is what I mean. You always take things so personally. Brandon and I are trying to protect the family legacy here. We're not attacking you." The conversation moved on after that, or at least it pretended to. But the air had changed. Every time someone brought up the future of the house, my father or my older brother would steer it back to what makes sense for the people who are actually here. My input was met with gentle headshakes and comments about how emotional I could get about things that were just practical. By midday, the rest of the small group had arrived: 2 more cousins, an old family friend named Marcus Hale, who had known us since we were kids. The plan for the afternoon was a long walk around the lake, followed by an early dinner and what my father kept calling a family conversation about next steps. I walked near the back of the group, listening to my older brother tell stories about the good old days when the whole family would spend entire summers here. My father laughed at everyone adding details that made Brandon sound like the steady, responsible son who had kept the tradition alive. At one point, when we stopped to skip stones, my father turned to me. You know, Avery, your brother was the one who convinced me we should keep this place, even when money was tight a few years ago. He stepped up. That kind of loyalty matters. I didn't answer right away. I watched a stone sink instead of skip. I remember those years, I said finally. I offered to help with the bills then, too. You told me it wasn't my place because I was still figuring out my own life. My older brother laughed, but it sounded forced. See, that's exactly what we're talking about. You turn everything into a fight. We're just trying to have a nice weekend. Tyler, who had been walking beside me, glanced over. He didn't say anything in front of everyone, but later, when we were filling water bottles at the pump near the house, he spoke low. Hey, you okay? That stuff at breakfast felt off, like they were talking around you instead of to you. I gave him the smallest nod. It's been like that for a while. I just didn't have the words for it until yesterday. He looked like he wanted to ask more, but my mother called everyone in for dinner. The evening meal was supposed to be relaxed. String lights were on over the big wooden table on the porch. The lake was dark and calm, but the conversation kept circling back to the house, and every time it did the same pattern, repeated praise for my older brother's steady presence, quiet reminders that my life in Albuquerque made me less central, less reliable, less family first. I lasted until the plates were being cleared. When my father stood up and said, "All right, let's have that family talk now," just the core group, I knew what was coming. The public shaming they had planned was about to happen in real time, wrapped in concern and smiles. I stayed seated for a moment longer than everyone else. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. From the clear, painful knowledge that if I stayed quiet now, I would be agreeing to disappear a little more every year. Eleanor Vance appeared at the edge of the porch light holding a small basket of tomatoes from her garden, like an excuse to be there. "Avery," she said softly, just loud enough for me to hear, "if you need somewhere to sit for a minute that isn't inside that conversation, my door's open." I meant what I said last night. Some things shouldn't be allowed to keep happening just because no one wants to make it awkward. I looked at her, then back at the table where my father, my older brother, my mother, Tyler, Lisa, and Marcus were already pulling chairs into a circle. The journal entry and the photograph with my grandmother's note felt like they were burning a hole in my pocket, even though they were still upstairs in the closet. I stood up slowly. "I think I need some air first," I told them. No one tried to stop me. My older brother even gave a little wave like I was being dramatic and would come back when I calmed down. I walked down to the water's edge again, the same place I had stood the night before. The lights from the house glowed behind me. Laughter still drifted out, but it sounded thinner now. I didn't know yet what I was going to do when I walked back inside. I only knew that something had already broken quietly and completely, and there was no putting it back the way it used to be. The porch lights were still on when I walked back up from the water. Everyone was already sitting in the loose circle of chairs my father had arranged. My older brother had taken the seat next to my father the way he always did when big family things were discussed. My mother sat with her hands folded in her lap. Tyler, Lisa Rivera, and Marcus Hale filled the other seats looking like they wished they were anywhere else. I took the empty chair at the far end. No one offered to move so I could sit closer. My father cleared his throat in that familiar way that meant he was about to lead. "We all love this place," he began. "It's been good to our family for a long time. But things change. Brandon has been the one keeping an eye on it, handling the repairs, making the drive when something breaks. Avery, you've got your own life now in Albuquerque. That's fine, but it means the practical decisions are going to fall to the people who are actually here and willing to carry the load." My older brother nodded, looking almost sorry for me. "Dad's not wrong. You're doing important work down there. We're proud of that. But this house, it needs someone who can show up without it being a whole production. You tend to turn every conversation into a big thing about fairness. Sometimes family just needs to move forward." The words landed softly the way they always did, wrapped in concern, delivered with smiles. My mother looked at her hands. Tyler shifted in his seat. Lisa Rivera stared at the table like she was counting the knots in the wood. I felt the old urge to swallow it, to smile, and say I understood, to keep the peace the way I had been taught. But the journal was still upstairs. The photograph with my grandmother's note was still in my bag, and Eleanor Vance's words from earlier were still sitting in my chest. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't stand up or point fingers, I just spoke. I hear what you're saying, I told them. You've decided that my life in Albuquerque makes my opinion less valuable here. You've decided that my older brother gets to speak for the family because he lives closer and agrees with you. And you've decided that when I point that out, I'm the one making things difficult. My father's mouth tightened. Avery, that's not fair. We're trying to have an adult conversation. I am having an adult conversation, I said. My voice stayed quiet, but it didn't shake. I'm telling you that the pattern hurts. It's not new. It's been happening for years. Every time I offer a thought about this house or about anything that matters to all of us, it gets turned into proof that I'm too far away or too emotional or too independent, and my older brother gets praised for the exact same things I get criticized for. My older brother let out a short laugh, the kind meant to make me look unreasonable. See, this is what we're talking about. You can't even hear feedback without turning it into an attack on you. Tyler spoke. Then his voice careful. Actually, it kind of did feel like that at breakfast. Like her opinion was already decided to be less important before she even said anything. Lisa Rivera nodded, once small but clear. Marcus Hale looked between my father and my older brother like he was seeing something he had never let himself name before. My mother finally lifted her head. Her eyes were tired. Michael, she said to my father, maybe we should listen for a minute. My father didn't answer her. He kept looking at me. You've always been sensitive, Avery. That's not a bad thing, but it makes these conversations harder than they need to be. Brandon and I are just trying to do what's best for the family as a whole. I stood up. My legs felt steady even though my chest was tight. I'm going to get something from upstairs, I said. I think it belongs on this table. No one stopped me. I walked into the house, up the creaking stairs, and into the guest room. The journal was still where I'd left it. I opened it to the page with the photograph, took both, and carried them back down. I placed the open journal and the old photograph in the center of the table, right between my father and my older brother. The note on the back of the photo faced up. My grandmother's handwriting was small but clear in the porch light. They believe pushing her down is kindness. I fear it will only make her leave. The table went completely quiet. My father stared at the photo like it had burned him. My older brother's easy smile had vanished. My mother covered her mouth with one hand. Tyler leaned forward to read the note. Lisa Rivera looked away, blinking hard. Marcus Hale let out a low breath. No one spoke for a long moment. I didn't need them to admit anything out loud. The silence was enough. I picked up my bag from where I had left it by the door. I'm going to head back to Albuquerque tonight, I said. My voice was calm. I don't think I can stay for the rest of the weekend knowing that every future visit is going to be another chance for the two of you to decide ahead of time that my voice doesn't count. My father finally found words. Avery, don't do this. You're making a mountain out of nothing. We can talk about this. I've been talking, I answered. You've been deciding I shouldn't. I'm choosing to believe what you've shown me instead of hoping it will change. My mother stood up. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. You don't have to leave like this, she said, almost pleading. We can figure something out. I shook my head, gentle but final. I already have. I'm not going to keep showing up to places where I have to earn the right to be heard by staying quiet about how I'm treated. That's the boundary I'm setting. I hugged her because I still loved her even through the ache. I didn't hug my father or my older brother. I didn't need to make a statement with anger. Walking away was the statement. Tyler followed me to my car. You sure about this? He asked quietly. I'm sure I can't keep pretending the pattern isn't there, I told him. And I'm sure I don't want to spend the rest of my life waiting for them to decide I've earned a seat at the table. He nodded. He didn't try to talk me out of it. The drive back to Albuquerque was long and dark. The radio stayed off. I kept the windows cracked so the night air could hit my face. Somewhere around the halfway point, I pulled over at a rest stop and cried for the first time since I'd found the journal. Not because I regretted leaving, because I understood what I had lost. There would be no more easy weekends at the lake house, no more casual texts about when are you coming up, no more assuming I would be included in the next gathering without having to weigh whether it was worth the quiet erasure. The family I'd grown up with, the version where we could disagree and still feel like we belonged, had already been gone for years. I just stopped pretending otherwise. By the time I reached my apartment in Albuquerque, the sky was starting to lighten. I sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. The city felt steady around me. My teaching job, my small circle of friends, the life I had built here on my own terms, they were still here. They had always been here. I had chosen myself. It didn't feel like a victory, it felt like the only honest thing left to do. Some cycles only continue because the people being diminished keep showing up and smiling through it. Staying quiet had kept this one alive in my family for a long time. I wasn't willing to keep it going anymore. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of this felt familiar, I'd really like to know I'm not the only one who had to learn this the hard way. Write relate if this sounds familiar.